What was your biggest work screw up? I cooked $10,000 of PA speakers after I let a hip hop artist studio audio engineer run the system too loudly for like an entire show. When my bosses told me it was $10,000, I thought they were exaggerating. But months later, I broke my ankle and was put on desk duty. I had access to the accounting software and found the repair bill for those speakers. Legit, $10,000. I was honest and upfront about what I had done, and they respected that, so I didn't get fired. All right, so forget the speakers. How do you even cook $10,000 worth of sound? Was it like deep fried and bass? Yeah. Story 2. I used a picture of George W. Bush with his messed up face as a sample image for some HTML work I was doing in 2006. The developers were supposed to replace it with the real image, but they just put an image from the database in front of it, and the Bush image was still there in the CSS styles as a background image instead. It was fine for quite a while, and nobody noticed it until the database server went down. The whole front page of the website was then wall-to-wall pictures of the president looking, according to my boss, like his face had been messed up. Higher-ups at the company called for me to be fired, but luckily folks on my team protected me. I was working my first real job out of college as a website developer. Story 3. In 2008, I spent $400+ on catering for an all-day meeting that included lunch for 12 people at my new investment bank job, approximately $33 a person. The food arrived and the office manager asked me what meeting the food was for because it was not logged in our meeting setup system. I realized that the meeting was the next day and that I had tons of food for nobody. I asked her to bring all the food and put it under my desk. She looked at me sideways and did it. I'd just come from a federal government background where this kind of expenditure was exorbitant and it would have been a major problem. I looked at the food and thought about it for like 20 minutes. What to do? I finally decided to go to my boss and tell him what I had done. You have the food under your desk? He asked. Yes, I replied. I expected a world of hurt. Show me, he said, and he walked over to my desk, looked and laughed. Put it in the kitchen and send an email to everyone in the company to come and help themselves, he said. Reorder it for tomorrow, he chuckled and walked away. Story 4. I worked at a movie theater as a projectionist in the early 2000s, and we had to pre-screen everything before it was shown to the public the next day. We were supposed to stay in the projection booth to monitor the reel. It was real film back then, but we'd often just go into the theater itself to preview them. Halfway through the Hulk, the Ang Lee one, the film got caught in the projector and destroyed about 20 minutes worth of the movie. Each reel of the movie was supposedly worth $150,000. Needless to say, it was bad times. Story 5. I used to work at a hotel. I was there for over 15 years. I'll never forget my first day, though, specifically my first checkout. I remember it well. The gentleman's total was $800, but I ran his card for $8,000. So the first thing I learned to do there wasn't a checkout, it was how to process a refund of $7,200. I'm sure with processing fees that cost my company a pretty penny. I actually wasn't sure I was going to make it at the beginning, but I ended up lasting over 15 years. However, I never forgot that first mistake. Story 6. The application service provider I used to work for called me in very early one morning. Customers were reporting a total service outage and the temperature was through the roof. The pager kept going off. We had a discount for downtime. 15 minutes later, I called the CTO, waking him up. I said, by chance, have you failed to renew our DNS registration? It was the loudest scream I ever heard. It was peanuts compared to the intercontinental debacle CrowdStrike kicked off. Story 7. I was working as a stagehand. I shattered a hand-painted ceramic vase prop just before half hour. Zillion pieces, no putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. This is also the story I tell new interns, hoping to get them to fess up to mistakes instead of hiding, alongside saying there are two kinds of people in the world, people who have messed up bad at work and liars. Back when Twitter was good for something other than documenting the downfall of humanity, wasn't there some long thread under an official company account where people were telling their work mishap stories? Story 8. I deployed changes to routing on a firewall that sent an international bank to the shadow realm. I realized my mistake in about 30 seconds and reverted it. Monitoring didn't even flag it, so the customer never found out. Not satisfied and not being able to do what I originally wanted, I did another change that resulted in the same outcome. I reverted even faster, and the client never found out. To my defense, the guys who managed Azure never deployed on any dynamic routing filtering, which they were supposed to do, which created a loop and the issue I stumbled upon. Story 9. I sent a text page out to the whole company, twice. Circa 2002-ish, we could get alpha pagers through work. A colleague got a new pager and asked me to page them a text message. I had a Palm Pilot phone and could send a text to a pager. So I texted her, call dispatch ASAP. She then said, text me something sassy or dirty or something like that. So I texted, hey baby, just shaved today. So when you get home, we can bust out the maple syrup and get making with some rumpy pumpy. Much love, your sugar daddy, XOXO. So while I'm typing that out, her pager goes off. She calls dispatch and hangs up a bit later. I ask what's up, then hit send. Oh, nothing, just everyone's getting a page to call dispatch ASAP. Wait, everyone? Her pager goes off a second time. Turns out they accidentally assigned her the all call number for our company's pagers, so I essentially texted over 200 staff at once. Story 10. I was a primary engineer for some interactive map products. These products worked with a service to periodically make requests to a backend and, update stuff on the map. The interval at which these requests were made was configurable. That is, it didn't require a software release to make adjustments. Well, one day I deployed what seemed like a low-risk software change, and within minutes, every single one of our web servers began turning into a smoking pit of ruin. At the time, we didn't have a good capability to roll back a release, so remedying the problem was not a lot of fun. In the end, our website was down for the better part of 2 hours. In the aftermath, we figured out what had happened. In a classic example of the Swiss cheese model, a few apparently benign issues that had been around for months conspired with my release to create a monster. Basically, the result of this was that the interval for that map update request thing was set to null. And that meant that if you loaded a page on our site with a map on it, your browser would proceed to make requests to that backend as fast as it possibly could. Like when I loaded the site, within about 1 second, my browser had fired 100 plus requests. Multiply that by thousands of visitors at any given time, and yeah, that slagged everything. Story 11. When I used to work at a Tim Hortons many years ago, I had enough of the customer racist freakouts where they'd lose their temper over the company raising the price of something by like 5 cents or asking for 2 cream, 2 sugar, then demanding a new one because 2 sugar was too much. The machines dispensed the sugar and were calibrated so it was always the same amount. One guy ordered 18 large iced cappuccinos, and with only one machine, it takes a long time to make them. So I asked the guy to come park literally 5 feet away as the line was so long in the drive-thru. He lost his mind, screaming at me and demanded the manager. I said, nope, go park over there, I'll bring them out to you. He refused to move, so I said, fine, not gonna move, here's your money back, and I'm not making your order, nor is anyone else. He went and parked, came in screaming, and the manager caved because she was a pushover. The manager brought them out and she handed them over. I saw all the drinks just fall off of 2 of 4 trays and completely opened and dumped all over the inside of his vehicle. The manager spent an hour cleaning it and a week later got a full interior detailing bill. About a month later, another customer got under my skin and I just looked at the guy and said, you know what? Thanks for being a schmuck because you just made me the best decision I'll ever make in my life. He paused and asked what I meant and said, you see that green car over there? Wait here for your odor and then watch that car. And I just said, screw it, and got in my car and left. The next morning, I got a new job and turned it into a much higher paying career. To whoever that guy is, screw you and thanks at the same time. Story 12. U.S. Army, FTX, Signal Battalion, Teletype Operator, Germany, 1985-ish. I was never told how much of our traffic was routed live, including critical messages. Showing off, bragging that we could recover from a complete power loss within 10 minutes of power restoration, I was lifting the safety cover to the emergency power shutoff switch. I accidentally pushed said switch. I recovered the systems in 7 minutes. I got my butt chewed out, then praised for a swift, unplanned loss of power. Story 13. I can't confirm if this is actually my fault because we never received blame for it. The equipment was old, but what I did could certainly have resulted in its failure. We scheduled a power shutdown to do electrical work at a facility belonging to a multinational company you have definitely heard of, and we planned it for weeks. The data center of this facility was backed up by a large UPS battery bank, and we needed it bypassed. There's no feasible way to provide backup power because that's the reason we were shutting it down, to install more robust, redundant backup power. So they planned a soft takedown of their data center for an 8-hour window on Saturday. The data center is always powered through the batteries and the regular power just charges the batteries, so if the power fails, there is literally no gap. The first thing I did was shut off the power to the data center, fed off the batteries, then I shut off the regular power that charged the batteries. No power in, no power out. We do the work, we go to turn it back on, and it doesn't turn back on. The emergency hotline is called, the technician is rushed out, bad motherboard, they have someone from the manufacturer get on a plane that night with the replacement part to fly across the country and then personally deliver it by hand several hours later on Sunday. We learned that the motherboard failed from overheating. We also learned that the cooling fans are powered by the same batteries that back up the data center. So, hypothetically, if you shut off the morning power and the battery power together, there is nothing to power the fans that cool the CPU, which remains very, very, very hot after you shut it off. At the beginning of the project, we were told the liquidated damages for shutting down operations for 1 hour were about $200,000. On Sunday, they were about an hour away from telling their employees to stay home on Monday. That mistake definitely would have gone from six figures to seven figures. Story 14. During the lockdown, I needed to air freight raw material from Germany to Texas, or we were at risk of shutting down the plant. This was during peak where flights were still grounded and it was tough to get a booking with a carrier. We managed to get a booking with a carrier for $30,000 to air freight the material, but there were a lot of logistical challenges to meet our deadline. They suggested trucking the material outside of Germany to Luxembourg and having it shipped first class priority to meet our deadline. My being freshly out of college and naive, that never caused any red flags on my end. And we ended up getting the material when we were supposed to, but my heart sank when I received the invoice, which was $110,000. I thought I was going to lose my job after that, but we renegotiated with them to bring the cost down to $80,000. I never got in trouble for it, but it was definitely my biggest mistake to this day. Story 15. Early in my career, before I really knew much about SQL, I was given a script to run by a remote DBA that was supposed to purge unwanted, orphaned records in a series of AR tables. I was a developer working on other areas of the application. I ran the script in the staging environment, got word from the business that all looked good, and then pushed it to production. Well, one portion of the script had a slight error. The DBA, while developing the script and testing something, had commented about the where clause, resulting in every record in an AR detail table being purged, millions of records just gone in a few seconds. There was considerable chaos. This happened on a Friday afternoon. We spent the weekend trying to retrieve the data from logs before just restoring to Thursday night's backup, essentially wiping out a whole day's worth of work and requiring the client to re-enter all of that data. Not really my mistake, though the DBA tried to blame me. Ironically, SQL is now probably my biggest strength, and I would have caught this error in a second if I had more confidence in my DB programming skills. Story 16. I gave a customer who owed us $700,000 the wrong banking information. The customer then sent $700,000 in funds to the wrong bank account. Luckily for me, the account number did not exist and the payment bounced back to them. I got lucky in that I just had to sheepishly tell them to please reprocess the payment using the correct info. Had the account actually existed, it would have been a nightmare trying to recover those funds. Alright, so imagine being the bank trying to figure out who tried to send $700,000 to Narnia. Story 17. My manager told me to test far and wide for weird interactions between the mobile service and the billing service. How wide? I asked. As wide as you can, he answered. A day later, he comes back fuming, saying I've broken billing and production for all customers. Turns out the last environment had a dependency system that didn't have a test instance, so it used production data. And when I poured an absolute torrent of junk data into it, it broke down crying. This, in turn, stopped billing as the billing engine needed the system's output. It wasn't my fault, though. I still stand by that. Story 19. I was a young lad put in charge of making new temporary cabling for a very big TV network for all the editing systems being installed, over like 50 or so of them. It took me months to make the ceiling. I didn't know there were different crypt types and was just doing what someone showed me to do. The cable's crypt type, but after a little bit of time, the cable would come undone because the wire gauge was barely off. And within months, the entire facility was filled with angry editors, engineers, producers, assistants, you name it, unable to figure out why video signals, edit decks, and scopes were all randomly but not working. It was this guy. At the end of those few months, they just made a huge box. I wrote my name on it, saying cables user/one skinny Dave made, and this began my legacy. And 20 minutes later, I'll occasionally run into an old engineer, and they still give me crap for it in a funny way. Story 19. I was blamed, for one, when I worked for a small furniture workshop. A guy I never really liked, but who was friends with the boss, left a buffer in a wardrobe we were working on. I was strictly waxing, not buffing. The wardrobe gets sent out and delivered. Now, this was a really small company, so they had only the one buffer. Obviously, the boss noticed it was missing, and the buyer was decent enough to call up and say, "You left a buffer in the wardrobe," and the boss had to go and pick it up. The little rat face blamed me being the newbie to the job, and again, he was buddies with his boss. I didn't lose my job immediately, but it basically made public enemy number one to the boss, and I did lose my job later on when he basically downsized. So, yeah, last I checked, the place is still shut down. Story 20. In 2015, I sent an email merge to 160 clients, about $3 million worth of revenue from a Word doc, and didn't even realize track changes was still on. For reasons I will never understand, Microsoft will send all revisions and comments in an email merge in bright red font if you don't have switch off or dark changes. This includes when the tracking is minimized and hidden on the Word doc. What should have been an upset 5-sentence email about renewing to the following year ended up being about one page with internal notes, revisions, and comments from colleagues. Some of these included too salesy and make it dream like they are getting more than enough. We're essentially selling the same house product. I curled up under my desk when I got the first reply. Story 21. This will probably get lost, but here goes. I'm a heavy equipment operator and June excavates mainly. About 5 years from now, I hit a 1.5-inch gas service to a house that was directly under the roof instead of the 4 feet deep it was supposed to be, and what the as-built plans told us it was. It almost instantly ignited and probably burned down not only the $250,000 excavator with only 800 hours on it, but also the house the main was attached to and caused severe damage to both neighboring properties. Luckily for me, I had my door already open and wasn't wearing the seatbelt, so I was able to escape without major injuries. All in all, the total damage was well over $2 million. Neither the company nor I were held liable because the gas company installed the service agent's building code and then lied on the as-built plans they submitted as official record. That one was a mess. Story 22. Not me, but a coworker, although I've had plenty of mistakes. I worked as a web designer developing marketing splash pages for media at an online retailer. When Barack Obama's book was released back when he was president, he typed Barack Osama on the webpage instead of Obama. I would have thought he was full of saying it was an accident, but the look on his face said otherwise. He was mortified he'd made the mistake. It was pretty small print, not prominent on the webpage, but still, it was on site for the world to see a number of hours before it was fixed. Story 23. Not me personally, but my shuck father. He couldn't be bothered mowing the lawn in the backyard, and if it became overgrown, his bright idea was to burn it off in the middle of the summer in Australia. He waited until August to light the lawn. The grass started burning, and so did the neighbor's creeper that had grown over our fence. The flames reached the top of the fence within minutes, and their little girl saw it and started screaming, which brought her mother out into their yard to see what was wrong. My dad panicked and quickly turned the house onto some flames. A week later, he got a visit from the city. They threatened him with prosecution for violating a total fire ban. To this day, he still doesn't know how my grandmother made an anonymous call to the duty after finding out he'd made all of us kids stand there and then watch him do the burn. Story 24. I once ruined about $150,000 worth of copper wire over the course of a couple of hours. $150,000 being what the wire would have sold for, not the actual material cost loss. To be fair, there was an engineer there with me, and we were testing a large size that the machine wasn't technically designed for. I can say that the majority of the classmates were mine, not the machines or the engineer. Most of the wire ended up getting twisted and beaten to the point that it was a total loss, meaning it could not be reworked and had to be sent to another company to scrap and give us around 75% of the value of the copper by weight. So in reality, it was more like a $40,000 mistake, but still a really bad day. I was lucky, and the engineer was homegrown, self-taught, and damn near untouchable in that company. We used to joke that if he passed away and his work laptop was destroyed, the plant would close. But he liked me and vouched for the mistake, so no disciplinary action was taken. I didn't care about the man hours it took to fix, but there were 4 people around $30 an hour, including the maintenance and upper production. helping me cut wire out of the machine. This lasted about a few good hours and my shift was over, but the machine was still down another 6 to 8 hours due to strip belts, tripped drives, fried relays, and warped tooling. So maybe more of a $50 to $60,000 mistake. Story 25. I was working at my desk when the IT guy leaned over to do something with my email permissions. A new folder was added under a code name, let's say Candlestick. He didn't tell me it was there, only that I would be briefed. I wasn't briefed because I was never moved to that project. The schedule was reshuffled, months passed, I ignored the folder and forgot it was even there. An email went around from reception saying that the servers were stressed, asking if people could please clear their inboxes, specifically anything non-essential over 500 megabytes. So, like, I'm going through, cleaning out old junk, and I see Candlestick. It has gigabytes of data, so I delete it, not thinking about it. The IT guy, for some crazy reason, had given me full admin access to the shared email folder. Candlestick was a good name for one of our very large clients, Sony, for example. I just wiped out several years' worth of incoming J2ME builds and documentation for a large and important mobile apps project. Some flurry of activity later, I was able to mercifully restore the data from the recycle bin, but there was that sinking realization that the panic of the project managers around me was kind of because of me. And if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 26. Not mine, but a few I had to deal with fallout of. The first one, my buddy randomly sent 100 megabytes of pictures of spiders to all the company distribution list, DL. No, it was not locked down. Yes, this was years ago, so it was a virtualized on-premise Exchange server. And yes, the ensuing fallout was exactly as stupid as you are thinking. No reason other than he liked them and wanted to share his passion. Another guy who was the new IT person for an airline, everyone thought he was awesome. You could never find him. He was always in a rush and always looked busy. Right up until the legal notices started arriving, the idiot was downloading corn and full movies off pirating sites from the company's server room for 8 hours a day every day. The third and last one was the customer whose network was held together with duct tape and baling twine. This thing was so unstable and shaky you could break it by looking at it funny. We were very carefully deploying desktop-side backup software at the time to try and capture their data for them before the thing imploded. The downside of this software was that the very first time it installed, it immediately initiated a full backup of the hard drive to the cloud-side storage. Frustrated with the slow pace of the project, the designated contact, an Oracle dev by trade, demanded that we stop messing around and push the damn software and get this done, screaming and carrying on at the tech. The tech, in true cover-your-rear CYA fashion, sent him a detailed email explaining exactly what he was asking, why it was a horrible idea, and listed the potential fallout and issues that would arise as a result, explaining recovery would be billable at emergency rates as per the contract. He CC'd the guy's boss and everyone else under the sun he could think of. The contact replied with 6 words, "I don't care, do it now." The head project manager, who was standing there talking with the tech because he could hear the guy screaming from 2 rooms away, was asked by said tech, "What do we do?" The project manager looked at the email, looked at the tech, and said, "Print that off, call the help desk manager and tell him to prep his guys for OT, that I'm sorry and that I'm sending him a bottle of top shelf stuff at Christmas, but screw this guy, you heard him, do it now." Said software was pushed, and within 15 minutes, 2,500 systems picked it up. About 60 seconds later, the install started, and within the hour, the entire network and entire company crashed and came to a grinding halt, where it stayed for the next 8 days while the help desk manually canceled 2,500 backup accounts and waited patiently for each system to slowly report back, through the noise of 2,499 other systems all trying to do the same thing and pick up the "you are canceled, stop trying to back up" command. Story 27. I took a seasonal job at a micro center. I was told to fix and stock the impulse aisle. The impulse aisle was 6 registers long, an actual full store aisle, and absolutely nothing about the product placement made any sense whatsoever. I'd rearranged about a dozen feet of the schizophrenic mess in a way that I thought would make more sense when my manager stopped me and made me aware of the term planograms, which, according to him, I'm not making this up, were designed by some secretary at the Ohio corporate office who has absolutely no training but enjoys it as a hobby. He grabbed the planograms for me, and I had to put it all back into schizophrenic order. Story 28. I worked for a software company for a while doing back-end content management. We had a current platform, an in progress beta platform for a few clients, and a legacy platform that a concerning number of clients didn't want to leave. After about a year, I ended up handling both the beta and legacy platforms. I mixed up a push process and totally messed up the legacy client for about 600 vendors for about an hour. It was not good. In my defense, I realized what I did almost immediately, but I didn't know what the fix was. We had to get our IT director in to fix it since he was the guy who designed the legacy platform back in the day. Okay, so for an hour, 600 vendors were probably wondering if their computers had suddenly achieved sentience and decided to rebel? Okay. Story 29. I wrote a virtual isolation script to contain potential threats quickly over the network for unmanaged systems. We used Tanium to push it out, P2P, and everything was peer-reviewed by a senior analyst prior to deploying the package to a host. Well, I was that senior analyst and didn't notice that the requester left the host field blank in one of the pushes. It was in the description field by mistake. Apparently, leaving the field blank was a wild card in Tanium, and it pushed to every system. We're talking over 200,000 endpoints across the world, including factory systems. It cost us millions to get everything back up, and the remediation was similar to this incident with CrowdStrike. Moral of the story, a senior peer review is not a suitable guardrail for a production deployment. I actually got a raise and promotion for finding the flaw in Tanium, but waiting for that phone call from my CISO after dinner with my wife was stressful. Story 30. I once misread documentation for automating the creation of our company's servers. Instead of creating only one new server, I ran a script that terminated all but one server on that account. The script ended with an error because I was on the wrong account to create the server I wanted. So, like a good little intern, I ran the script on the correct account and wiped all but one of the servers on that account too. I got nicknamed the Terminator for that, and it was not said affectionately. My boss stepped up big time for me and fully acknowledged that having a new intern copy and pasting scripts with full admin access and no way to see the results before running them was a recipe for disaster. Story 31. I publicly apologized to people with the wrong disability. While I was still a student, my astronomy professor hired me to get the college's new planetarium up and running. I'd build shows, stand in front of the audience, and present them, then they would watch a movie. There was a steep learning curve for everyone, and we had some small mistakes each run. After about 2 months, my professor finally decided to come to one of the shows to see how it was going. When traveling ahead in time to see how the night sky changed, if you didn't turn off Earth's atmosphere, it would rapidly flash between night and day, causing a strobe effect. My coworker running the computers forgot to turn off Earth's atmosphere, and I, standing in front of an audience of about 60 people, including my boss, said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry if you're paraplegic. I'm an epileptic." Story 32. There have been many memorable ones. I replaced a server, as documented, and accidentally took 5 office buildings offline, one of which was a location involved in hiding things inside other things. I saw too much and didn't go back. I put a decimal point in the wrong place and overpaid someone by several $1,000,000. The check bounced, so no big deal. In a hardware store, I was half-heartedly shown how to use the paint shaker by my perpetually intoxicated manager. 5 minutes later, I loaded the paint can incorrectly and it exploded, sending tint and paint everywhere. It took days to clean it up. I didn't get fired for that, but later got fired 3 times. Story 33. I've worked at Goodwill before, and the nature of the thing is sometimes tags come off. We're supposed to get them repriced, but it works out for everyone if I just know what it's supposed to be, and even better if they have another item that's the same price. Anyway, this dude comes up with 3 pairs of chairs. Pair 1 and 2 were the same price. Easy. But pair 3 didn't have any tags. They weren't particularly more special than the other chairs, so I just rang them up for the first pair's price to save everyone some time. My boss came up to me later. "Shuji, did you sell our personal chairs?" They had set up a little table with some of our break chairs nearby where people could fill out applications, and some customer had taken those chairs, putting them in the cart, then asked me for the price at checkout, and I sold them to him. I sold our break room chairs to this dude, and we just always had 2 fewer chairs in the break room after that. Story 34. Promoted to using the petrol-driven grass cutter at my summer job at an airport, I fired it up and let off the clutch, only to have it shoot away from me and demolish some piece of radar equipment. Ironically, the sensitivity of the equipment was the reason why we had to keep the grass short. They had to close the airport whilst repairs were effected. This delayed all flights by like 45 minutes, which meant the UK Prime Minister was late getting to a vote in Parliament, which made the news the next day. I was 15 and I was back on the side. Story 35. In 2012, I worked at Walmart overnight doing inventory stuff in the back rooms. One night I was putting up a pallet that had two lounge chairs on it. I'm not sure if the department number had changed, but at the time the furniture department was 72. So my tired brain told the system that there were 72 chairs on this pallet instead of two. The next night, one of the assistant managers told me that I messed up the quantity on that pallet and almost cost the store about $10,000. Luckily, the first shift caught it and fixed my goof. My manager wasn't mad, he just told me to pay more attention next time. Story 36. Not me, but a colleague of mine. We were switching email clients and he wanted to keep his history, which he'd been told he'd lose. Since we wrote scripts to automate functions in the team, he decided to write a script to forward his email to the new client. Except he made a small mistake with the script, and instead of forwarding, he did reply to all to several years of emails. The script was pretty efficient, so it got through several hundred emails before he realized what was going on. He was getting responses for weeks afterward as people came back from leave and responded. Story 37. Relaxing with actresses in the dressing room during the second act, I heard the thunderstorm sounds over the stage monitor speaker. One of the girls squinted at me and said, isn't that your cue for a quick change? Holy Christmas, I tore out of that dressing room like my pants were on fire and skidded to a halt in the stage left wings to find a disheveled pile of costume pieces and no actor in sight. Very fortunately for all concerned, said actor had perfected his own quick change over the course of the run, to the point where he only wanted me to hand him a comb at the end of the process. He was, of course, still a bit ticked that I wasn't there on cue, but merely said, "You weren't there," as I blushed and apologized. He was truly a gentleman. Story 38. 32 years and 5 jobs ago, so it should be safe to tell this one. I was a 22-year-old working the evening shift in a university computer lab doing routine maintenance to the mainframe, which was used by people on dumb terminals all over campus. I was a low-level employee, so I had limited system access, but I was also eager to learn. My office contained the mainframe's main printer, which was a giant machine that used a steel band to print on continuous rolls of green bar paper. Now, for those unfamiliar, if someone wanted a different font, I would have to change the steel band, and the printer was so noisy it was encased in a sound dampening box, larger than a washing machine, and made so much dust it had to be vacuumed daily, sometimes multiple times. One day, right after the day shift people left, I noticed that one of the higher level people with God privileges, well, they forgot to log out before he went home. Before logging him out, I succumbed to the temptation to take the opportunity to try to learn a little bit more about the mainframe. I issued a command that I thought would set up a sort of debugging mode that would print out detailed logs of the commands I'd enter next, so that I could read them later to try to learn more about how the system worked. Well, to my horror, I quickly discovered that the command I issued didn't turn that mode on just for me. It turned it on for every single user and process currently using the system from anywhere. I set the reporting level back to normal right away. It was in that mode for maybe a minute tops, but it would take hours for the printer to catch up printing all that output. Nothing I could think of to try would clear the print queue. All I could do was continue feeding box after box of paper into the machine until it finally, mercifully caught up and stopped printing sometime around 1 a.m. All the paper got shoved into the trunk of my car, then driven to an all-night diner a few miles away where I disposed of it all in their dumpster before going inside for some pancakes. Story 39. I was a cog in a calamity of errors. As a student architect working on Vectorworks, I accidentally moved grid line 1, pushed the arrow button while it was selected 5 centimeters because this was the arrow key margin setting, on the basement plan of a 70-meter, 230 feet wide, 10-story luxury building. The lead technologist hadn't locked the grid lines. The drawing was checked by the lead architect who didn't see the error. The contractor used our drawing for the setting out, not the engineers. The building was built with this measurement. The fallout, the developer has to pay every unit owner for the square meters lost. It worked out to a lot of money as it calculates to be over 11.75 meters squared of floor space. They managed to blame the contractor for not using the engineer's drawings, which I still feel a bit bad about. Story 40. I used to work in a supermarket here in the UK. When creating your orders for the week, you had to enter a 6-digit code that relates to each item. We had a huge book with all the codes in, and I used to enter the numbers without looking. But once our delivery turned up with an entire truck of pot noodles. Turns out I was happily typing the numbers in the quantity box rather than the PLU, the code box. We literally had tens of thousands of these darn noodles to shift, and we used to sell about 10 a week on average. Still amazed a warehouse didn't look at it and think, that doesn't quite look right. When a store orders 192,874 cases of the same item when they usually get 2, they just frickin' sent them. Story 41. I had a former employer, and I oddly didn't get fired for this. I was instructed to swap out a monitor on our server. It was a cramped server room, and accessing the video cables was gonna be hard. So I asked if I could take down the server after hours, swap the monitor correctly, and then turn it all back on and go home. I was told no. So I went into the server room, disconnected the monitor cable, and gently pulled it from the rack. Yes, it was a monitor that used a VDP, and it was being replaced with one hand that had an HDMI. The cable came up and had something tied around it. It was the connector to our SCSI RAID box from the back of the card. Someone had tied them together with a cable tie and did not even screw the connector down. This took down our office for 2 days while a new one was ordered and shipped to us. When our CIO asked me what happened, I told him and sent him my email exchanges. I couldn't afford a phone with a camera back then, so I had to rely on the emails. Our office came back up and I was able to retrieve our data from backups. The RAID itself wasn't harmed, but that card was fried. Story 42. I've shared this story before, testing a lubrication oil heat exchanger to see if reducing the flow rate would change the oil temperature. I meant to partially close the inlet valve. I actually grabbed the outlet valve. As soon as I started closing the valve, the water flow caught the valve and slammed it closed. Pressure spiked, the gasket blew out, and it started raining coolant on me. I dropped 1,000 liters of coolant on the ground. I was in my 3-month probation, and I thought I was fired for sure. My boss just said, "You won't make that mistake again." After we recovered as much coolant as possible, we ordered new valve handles that can operate without a manual input, and I labeled the valves better. Story 43. I was working in a product testing laboratory testing an industrial ultrasonic cleaner the size of a standard kitchen oven. The thing was extremely loud and needed to run for 8 hours, so I set it up to run overnight on a Friday afternoon. I came into the office on Saturday to take the measurements I needed. I had a $6,000 data acquisition unit sitting on top of the product. For testing, the product was filled with water. I came into the office Saturday morning and the temperature in the lab was about 95 degrees and 99% humidity. The cleaner had atomized the water, heated it up, and dumped tons of humidity into the lab. Our HVAC system couldn't keep up with it. The data acquisition system wasn't working, and when I picked it up, water poured out. Story 44. I was a young project manager responsible for shipping pull-up banners for a congress. The courier came early and I was running late. I had to decide whether to reschedule the courier in order to have time to check the printed pull-ups and ensure there were no mistakes, risking them not arriving at the Congress on time, or send them without checking. There are usually never any catastrophic issues and guarantee on-time delivery. So I sent them without checking. My boss was at the Congress and saw the banners. They were majorly messed up. The files were super blurry. You couldn't see any of the data they were presenting. Our client was mad. My boss had to go find another printer on the fly and have them redone. Not easy. We lost that client. Now that I'm older and in a more senior role, I understand that the chaos was more the product of my environment. I never should have been forced to make that decision on the fly, nor was I really explained the importance of checking, etc. Essentially, I had no oversight. I've never made a mistake like that again, but more importantly, it taught me the value in good process and explaining to juniors the logic behind what they are doing versus just the simple steps. Story 45. One of my coworkers did not urge their buyer to do a land survey for a plot of land. They closed the deal, and he drove to the plot with them. He just put the address into Google Maps and went on his way. Lo and behold, the Google Maps pinpoint was completely wrong, which they would have found out with a survey, lol. The buyer ends up clear-cutting the entire plot and begins to build a whole house on it. The owner drives by one day and sees a foundation being poured on his land and has a meltdown. I forgot what the repercussions were, but he was so stressed out about it, pretty sure it ended up being an insurance claim. Story 46. I was an admin working in a high school. We turned on the heaters for the first time and a standalone smoke detector went off. It started chirping and I mentioned we had a CO2 detector go off while walking down the hallway talking on the radio. Some kid heard it, called their mom, who then called the fire department. They showed up in force, and with cops, they were like, "We had a report of a CO2 detector go off," and made us evacuate the building. They also wanted to know why the big alarm system didn't go off and alert them. We traced it back to the kid, a special education kid who pointed at me and said, "You said CO2 detector," and I was like, crap, I meant smoke, and I still, to this day, have no clue why I said CO2, as I do know the difference, but yeah, I did it. That worked its way all the way up the chain to the superintendent and head of security. It was super fun to explain. The whole staff got confidentiality and de-escalation training, as they were more mad about me not keeping things low-key than anything else. I will say, however, because of that extra training, we had a bomb scare, and I personally was in charge and evacuated the whole building without anyone having a clue what was going on until the PR team could, do their thing. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.